Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Toylist of Titles. I'm Justin Stevens, and thank you again for spending your time and your Google searches through YouTube to find our show about the breakdown here. Today's show is going to be the Houston Texans. We're going to break down the Houston Texans and their fantasy relevancy for 2020 and any of the players that you might need to know about heading into the 2020 season. We're going to break down everything just like we did the last show, from the fantasy studs to the possible breakouts, the letdowns, Mr. Reliable, and your IDP potential studs to watch for. Real quick before I get into that, don't forget you can catch us at Toylist Titles. You can catch Coach John Sheps at Coach Sheps on Twitter. Myself at JustinFF_, and our man Nate Whalen at Nate_Dirt19. Right now you're watching on YouTube or Periscope because we are not airing this one as a podcast on Apple Podcast or Podbean or Spotify like our other shows, but you can find us there for our other shows if you like. And I believe our next episode we're going to be dropping on the podcast are the tight end rankings. So check us out. So let's jump right into it for the Houston Texans. Show that little banner real quick just to remind everybody that's watching. All right, so the fantasy studs for the Houston Texans. There's really only one major stud that really stands out. The one obvious guy is Deshaun Watson. Watson will still be a top 5 quarterback this season, even without DeAndre Hopkins. Because the main reason is because of his running game. Last season, he finished 4th in carries, 4th in red zone carries, 4th in rushing yards, 2nd in rushing touchdowns. And now that he's lost his safety blanket in DeAndre Hopkins, I see that there is a more than likely chance that he's probably going to run the ball even more. I also feel like they've improved their running game by gaining David Johnson in that offense, and they still have Duke Johnson, so they have a decent running duo there. So typically running quarterbacks help running backs. Well, good running backs can also help rushing quarterbacks because the defense doesn't know what to play into on a given running play. So I see that being a huge bonus for him. And anytime that you can get a good rushing quarterback in fantasy football, that's like a cheat code in fantasy football, guys. A cheat code that's allowed and a cheat code that can't be stopped. Let's see. I also wrote down top 12. Oh, yeah. His protection rate from last season with his offensive line was in the top 12, and he had a top 10 supporting cast efficiency. And if you watch the Indianapolis Colts show, essentially what that means is the supporting cast around him were extremely efficient in their individual positions. So all the other players on the field were pretty darn efficient to be a top 10 efficiently ranked team. So even with the loss of DeAndre Hopkins, the rest of his supporting cast still played pretty well. And they also brought in Brandon Cooks to help fill in that void. Speaking of Brandon Cooks, next up is to stay tuned for the breakouts. And my breakouts are Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. And the reason I put them both on here is because Kenny Stills simply has never been that guy, never been the guy. He's a role player, always has been, always will be. Plus, if you go to playerprofiler.com and you look at the bottom where they show the injury history on the little fake human body, it has it all glowing up on what body parts are hurt over the last few years, and his entire body seems like it's lit up. Poor guy cannot stay healthy, but so I'm projecting that Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks is going to take that lead role, but either way, even if they split that lead role, I think they're both going to blow up in this offense. They both have that potential anyway, and Will Fuller obviously has a long history of injuries himself, but if he can stay healthy and he can stay on that field, then in 8 fully healthy games that he saw last season, he saw a snap share of 90% or more, even with DeAndre Hopkins on the field. So they love running a lot of at least 2 wide receiver sets. Most of them were 3 wide receiver sets in that offense last season. And his average draft position is the 606. So I'll touch on that just a little bit more in a moment. But first, with Brandon Cooks, Obviously, the big scare is his injury history as well. He has had – hold on, I've got a tractor driving. The joys of living in the country. All right, so Brandon Cooks has had 4 concussions in the last 3 seasons, which is a huge deal. I'm not going to look past that, but again, if he can stay healthy, he did have a down year last year as the wide receiver 3 to a down quarterback in Jared Goff, and I think that was a lot due to the fact that that McVay couldn't. He's no longer able to scream into Goff's ear anymore within 15 seconds of the snap to tell him, or within 15 seconds of 0 on the play clock, to tell him what reads to make, and he has trouble with his pre-snap reads because the year before, Brandon Cooks was able to crack off 1,200 yards, and he's consistently a 1,000-yard guy no matter where he goes. He's always underrated going into drafts, so keep that in mind. And his average draft position right now is the 7-12. So again, I'm not saying go out and try to get both of them because they have a mid-6th and a late 7th round ADP. You potentially could get them both. That's not a good idea. One of them will break out and be the main guy. The other one's still going to have a pretty solid season. So whichever one is the main guy and can stay healthy will break out. So I would suggest you try to get one of them. If you don't get Will Fuller in time, then make sure your next pick is Brandon Cooks, because I do believe that one of them will break out. Next, we have beware of letdowns. I honestly don't really see a real letdown in this offense because I think that every one of them are every player in this offense is pretty well where their ADP should be, if not higher than where the ADP should be. But if I had to choose one, I'm going to say David Johnson, and here's why. At his 312 ADP, I think that's actually kind of fair, just like I said. But and at the 312, you're expecting him to be your RB2, maybe RB3, depending on how you draft, if you're taking him at the end of the third. But he's only my choice here because I don't really see any real unforeseen letdowns here with David Johnson himself, but Duke Johnson is actually an extremely talented running back in his own right, and when he's been given the opportunity, he's performed extremely well himself. So he could potentially take away something from David Johnson. Maybe they use him a lot more in passing downs or whatnot. I'm not really sure, but with a new coaching staff, he may have the new opportunity. But also without DeAndre Hopkins on the field, having David Johnson and Duke Johnson in that backfield with Watson being able to run so well himself, they might face a lot more defenses that are a little bit more likely to play the run before the snap, just because there is that less threat downfield with DeAndre Hopkins. So that could maybe potentially affect David Johnson as well. Again, I'm not real scared of him being a letdown, but if I had to choose one, it would probably be him. Mr. Reliable is the guy I was just talking about, Duke Johnson. He's consistently always right around where you expect him to be in fantasy football. So a lot of times people talk a little too highly of him, but personally, I kind of expect him to be a solid, reliable flex position for me, because if they do utilize David Johnson, he's not going to get a ton of opportunity or a ton of looks. But if he does end up getting those looks, then he will do well with it. So David Johnson should be a reliable RB2, RB3, so you can kind of call him a Mr. Reliable as well. I think he's going to finish right around where his ADP is. But keep in mind that Duke Johnson's ADP is as the 11-2. So, but he finished as he finished as a high-end RB4 last season. So again, he's just a solid flex guy. IDP guys to know. Pretty simple here. Zach Cunningham is returning from a 100 tackle season. Another year under his belt. I think he's like a 3-year vet, so this will be his 4th year if I'm remembering correctly. And he, again, coming off a 100 tackle season is no joke. He's progressing pretty quickly. And then, of course, J.J. Watt. You can't forget about him. He did have 100 points in most typical scoring formats for IDP last season, and he only played in 8 games. So obviously he's still a stud. He still hasn't lost it. So that is your breakdown for the Houston Texans. Again, I'm only 10 minutes into it. That's how these videos are designed to be, 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on how much we have to talk about. Didn't have a whole lot of exciting things to talk about with the Texans because I think we're pretty much getting what people are laying out for us when it comes to the Texans. But again, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button down there. Subscribe to help us out if you would. Catch our other videos. Also catch any of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Spotify. And again, at Coach Sheps, at JustinFF_, at Nate_Dirt19, and at Toilisted Titles is where you can find us. And as always, just love each other, guys.